The city air was different on the walk home. It wasn't just the crisp morning chill. It was as if the very molecules had realigned. The silence inside my head, once a roaring void, was now a peaceful, contemplative quiet. I moved through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, the weight of Elara's memory a tangible warmth against my skin, a secret ember glowing in the core of my being. The house, when I unlocked the door, didn't feel empty. It felt like a stage waiting for its actors to return. Mark came home 2 days later. The sound of his key in the lock sent a genuine electric jolt of joy through me. I flew to the door, and he dropped his suitcase, catching me in a fierce, spinning hug that smelled of airplane and his familiar cologne. "God, I missed you," he murmured into my hair, his voice rough with fatigue and emotion. "I missed you too," I said, and it was the profound truth. But it was a more complex truth than it had been 3 weeks ago. My love for him was a deep, steady river, but the experience with Elara had been a sudden, breathtaking waterfall, a reminder of the river's power and its capacity for wild, unpredictable beauty. Life settled back into its comforting rhythms. We cooked dinner together, our hips bumping companionably in the kitchen. We caught up on our favorite shows, my legs draped over his on the couch. We made love, and it was familiar and passionate and good. Yet, a part of me remained in that hotel suite, standing at the window overlooking the city of scattered diamonds. I felt, for the first time, like a fully integrated person, a wife who adored her husband, and a woman who carried a secret that belonged only to her. 3 weeks after Mark's return, I was browsing in a small, independent art gallery I often visited, a place that specialized in local, emerging artists. The air smelled of turpentine and old wood. I was studying a turbulent, beautiful seascape, lost in the swirls of blue and gray, when I felt a presence beside me. A scent, neroli and sandalwood. My heart stopped, then hammered back to life in a frantic, wild rhythm. I didn't need to turn. He knew. "It captures that feeling, doesn't it?" Her voice, that low, husky sound, was exactly as I remembered. The moment just before the storm breaks. All that potential energy. I turned slowly, my breath catching. Elara stood there, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. She was dressed in tailored trousers and a simple silk blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a loose knot. She looked elegant, professional, and utterly devastating. "Elara," I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. "I wondered if our paths would cross again," she said, her eyes drinking me in with the same intense appreciation they had that night. "I'm glad they have." We stood for a moment, just looking at each other, the air between us crackling with the memory of everything unsaid. The gallery, with its hushed atmosphere and other patrons, felt suddenly like the most intimate and the most public of places. Would you like to get a coffee?" I heard myself ask, the impulse bypassing all rational thought. "There's a place just around the corner." "I'd like that very much," she said. The cafe was warm and bustling, a stark contrast to the quiet tension that enveloped our small table in the corner. We held our mugs, the steam rising between us like a ghost. "You look well," she said, her gaze soft. "The light, it's brighter now." "It is," I admitted. "Thank you for that talk." It was different this time. The desperate, lonely edge was gone. We spoke of our work with more depth. I learned she was an architect, a shaper of spaces, which made a perfect poetic sense. She asked about Mark, not with jealousy, but with a genuine curiosity. I found myself telling her about the small, happy moments of his return, and she listened, her head tilted, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's funny, isn't it?" she mused, tracing the rim of her cup. "How an experience with one person can sometimes deepen your connection to another. Doesn't subtract. It adds." Her perception once again left me breathless. She saw the geometry of my soul as clearly as she might see the lines of a building. "It did," I whispered. "It added a layer to me I didn't know was missing." The conversation flowed effortlessly, a current pulling us back into the deep, intimate waters we had shared. The memory of the hotel room hung between us, a palpable presence. I could almost feel the cool sheets against my skin, the weight of her gaze. "I've thought about that night often," she said, her voice dropping, her eyes holding mine with a magnetic intensity. "The way the city lights looked in your hair, the sound of your breath catching." A flush warmed my chest and crept up my neck. My own memories rose, vivid and sensory. The taste of her skin, the feeling of her hands mapping my spine. "So have I confessed. Every day." She leaned forward slightly, and the world narrowed to the space between our faces. "There's an exhibition opening next Friday," she said. "At the Modern Art Museum. Collection of sculptures. Have 2 tickets. It would be a different kind of atmosphere." It was an invitation, a clear, deliberate step onto a new path. This wasn't a chance meeting in a bar. This was a planned rendezvous. My mind raced. Mark was scheduled to be out of town again that weekend, a short trip to see his brother. The suspense of the moment was a tight coil in my stomach. This was a choice. A conscious decision to walk back into the electric, unpredictable storm that was Elara. I looked at her, at the intelligence and the quiet hunger in her eyes, and I felt the same part of me that had nodded in the jazz bar awaken, stretching and yearning for that profound connection, for the way she made me feel entirely, thrillingly seen. I took a slow, steadying breath, the air tasting of coffee and possibility. The decision felt immense, a fork in the road of my life. "What time does it start?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face, a smile that promised everything and asked for everything in return. 7, she said. "I'll meet you at the entrance." We parted on the street outside the cafe, the autumn sun casting long shadows. She didn't try to touch me. She simply looked at me, her gaze a promise and a question, before turning and walking away. I stood there for a long time, watching her until she disappeared into the flow of pedestrians, the ghost of her perfume lingering in the air around me. The ember inside me was no longer just a memory. It had been fanned into a steady, burning flame. The next chapter was about to begin, and I already knew I would walk into it with my eyes wide open. The week that followed was a study in suspended animation. My normal life, the shared coffee with Mark in the morning, the deadlines at work, the comfortable silence of our evenings, felt like a beautifully rendered film I was watching from a slight but palpable distance. A part of me, the core that had been awakened in that hotel room, was already living in the future, in the space between 7 o'clock and an unknown hour on Friday night. The secret, which had been a quiet, warm stone in my pocket, now felt like a live wire, humming with a low, constant voltage. Every time my phone buzzed, a jolt went through me, half expecting it to be her, though we had not exchanged numbers. Our connection existed in a realm outside such mundane logistics. Mark left on Thursday, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He kissed me goodbye at the door, a long, sweet kiss that tasted of home and love. "I'll be back Sunday afternoon," he said, his thumb stroking my cheek. "Don't have too much fun without me." A complex twist of guilt and anticipation tightened in my chest. "I'll try to manage," I said, forcing a light tone. I watched his car pull away from the curb, a strange sense of duality settling over me. The house was silent again, but this silence was different. It was a waiting silence, charged with potential. Friday unfolded with agonizing slowness. I chose my clothes with a care I hadn't exercised in years. A deep emerald green dress of a soft, clinging wool, the color a stark, brave contrast to the gray autumn afternoon. It was neither an attempt to replicate the first night nor to pretend I was someone I wasn't. It was an armor and an invitation, a statement of the woman I had become in the intervening weeks. The Modern Art Museum was a sculpture itself, a building of sharp angles and vast planes of glass that reflected the bruised purple and orange of the sunset. My heels clicked on the cold, polished concrete of the entrance hall, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. And there she was, leaning against a massive, raw concrete pillar, as if she were part of the exhibit. She was wearing a tailored black jumpsuit, its sleek lines emphasizing her lean frame. Her hair was down, a dark cascade against the stark backdrop. Her eyes found mine instantly, and the same magnetic pull I'd felt in the bar in the cafe snapped into place, stronger than ever. A slow, deep smile spread across her face, one that didn't just touch her lips, but lit her entire being. "You came," she said, her voice a low hum that resonated in the pit of my stomach. "I said I would," I replied, my own voice steadier than I felt. "People say a lot of things," she said, pushing off the pillar and closing the distance between us. She didn't touch me, but she stood close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, could smell the familiar, devastating scent of her perfume. "Shall we?" The exhibition was titled Form and Desire. It was a collection of contemporary sculptures, all exploring the human form in abstract, evocative ways. We moved through the white-walled rooms slowly, the atmosphere between us thick and heavy with a tension that was both intellectual and deeply, overwhelmingly physical. She was a brilliant guide. She'd point out the flow of a bronze curve, her finger tracing the shape in the air. "See how the artist implies touch here," she murmured, standing close behind me. Her breath a warm whisper near my ear as we looked at a piece of polished marble that suggested two intertwined bodies. "The stone looks soft, doesn't it? As if it's yielding. That's the genius of it. It makes you want to reach out and feel if it's truly as cold as you know it must be." Her words were a key, unlocking a hyper-awareness in me. I wasn't just looking at art, I was feeling it. Every smooth plane, every rough edge, every implied caress in the metal and stone was a mirror of the sensations humming under my own skin. We discussed the pieces, our conversation a delicate, intricate dance of double meanings and shared understanding. We spoke of negative space, of the power of what is left unsaid and unseen, and our eyes would meet, and the unspoken thing between us would grow larger, more potent. In a quieter corner of the exhibition, isolated by a clever arrangement of freestanding walls, was a sculpture of woven glass threads, creating a hollow, human-like form. It was fragile and incredibly strong, shimmering under the focused spotlight. "It's beautiful," I breathed. "It's transparent," Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. She turned to face me, our bodies close in the semi-darkness. The sounds of the other patrons were a distant murmur. "It has nothing to hide. Its strength and its fragility are both completely exposed. That takes a certain kind of courage, don't you think?" Her gaze was unwavering, and in it, I saw the same raw honesty I had felt that first night. She was not offering me an affair of stolen, frantic moments. She was offering me a space to be entirely, unapologetically myself, with all my complexities and contradictions. "Elara," I said, her name a sigh, a surrender. That was all the invitation she needed. Her hand came up, and her fingertips, cool from holding her glass of champagne, brushed against my cheek. It was the first time we had touched since the hotel, and the contact was an electric shock, jolting the breath from my lungs. Her thumb stroked my lower lip, her eyes dark and intense. "I've replayed that night in my mind 100 times, she confessed, her voice thick. "The way you taste, the sounds you made, the feel of your skin under my hands. It wasn't enough. I need more." The air crackled around us. The suspense of the entire week, the tension of the evening, coalesced into this single pivotal moment. The world outside, my marriage, my responsibilities, faded into an indistinct blur. There was only her, and the terrifying, exhilarating truth of what I wanted. "My house is empty," I heard myself say, the words feeling both reckless and utterly right. "Until Sunday." The drive to my home was a blur of streetlights and tense, charged silence. We didn't speak. We didn't touch. The space inside the car was filled with the sound of our breathing and the roaring anticipation of what was to come. Pulling into the driveway of my own house, the place I shared with Mark, felt like the most transgressive act of all. I was bringing this wild external energy into the very heart of my domestic life. I unlocked the door and we stepped inside. The familiar scent of our home, of lemon polish and the faint echo of Mark's cologne, was suddenly alien. Elara paused in the entryway, her eyes scanning the family photos on the wall, the cozy living room, as if committing the context of my life to memory. Then she turned to me, and all hesitation fell away. She crossed the room in 3 swift strides, and her hands came up to frame my face, not with the gentleness of the museum, but with a possessiveness that made my knees weak. "This is you," she whispered, her gaze sweeping over the room before locking back onto mine. "All of this. And the woman in the hotel. And the woman in the museum. I want all of it." And then she kissed me. It was not like the first kiss, which had been a slow exploration. This was a claiming. It was hungry and desperate, full of the pent-up longing of the weeks of separation. Her mouth was demanding, her tongue sweeping in to taste me, to remind me of a flavor I had only ever found with her. My hands clutched at the sleek fabric of her jumpsuit, pulling her closer until not a sliver of light could pass between us. We stumbled through the living room, a tangle of limbs and frantic hands, shedding jackets, kicking off shoes. We didn't make it to the bedroom. We ended up on the large, soft rug in front of the cold fireplace, the same rug where Mark and I sometimes watched movies. The domesticity of the setting made the intensity of what was happening feel all the more profound, all the more real. This wasn't a fantasy in an anonymous hotel room. This was my life, being irrevocably expanded. The process of undressing was slower this time, a deliberate, ritualistic unveiling. Each button of her jumpsuit was a small revelation. Each inch of skin revealed by my trembling fingers was a victory. Her hands pushed the emerald dress from my shoulders, her mouth following the path of the fabric, branding my skin with hot, open-mouthed kisses. When we were finally bare, skin to skin on the wool rug, the world narrowed to the space we occupied. The faint light from the street lamp outside slanted through the window, painting gold stripes across her back, across my legs. What followed was a deep, slow exploration, a conversation without words that lasted for hours. There was no rush, no frantic race towards a finish. It was a languid, sensuous journey of rediscovery. Her mouth was a brand on my neck, my breasts, the sensitive skin of my inner thighs. My hands relearned the elegant architecture of her spine, the powerful muscles of her shoulders. We traded control, back and forth, a silent negotiation of giving and taking that was more intimate than any spoken vow. The intimacy was staggering, a feeling of being so completely known and accepted that it bordered on pain. It was the intimacy of 2 people who had acknowledged the complexity of their situation and had chosen to dive into it headfirst, together. Later, as the moon rose high and cast its cold blue light into the room, we lay tangled together, spent and breathless. She had pulled an afghan from the couch over us, and I was curled into the curve of her body, my head on her chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of her heart. Her fingers were tracing lazy, meaningless patterns on my arm. "He's a lucky man," she said quietly, her voice vibrating through her chest and into my ear. Her words weren't bitter or jealous. They were a simple, profound statement of fact. I didn't know how to answer that, so I just pressed closer, the truth of her statement settling over me. We drifted in and out of a light, sated sleep, the boundaries between our bodies blurring until it was hard to tell where she ended and I began. I was woken by the first gray light of dawn filtering through the window. Elara was already awake, propped on an elbow, watching me. Her expression was soft, but there was a new, unreadable depth in her eyes. "I have to go to Tokyo," she said, her voice low. A project. It's a big one. I'll be gone for at least 3 months. The words landed like a physical blow, a sudden, cold splash of reality. 3 months. The ember of our connection, which had just been stoked into a roaring blaze, was threatened with being smothered. I must have looked as stricken as I felt, because she leaned down and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted like goodbye. "It's not an ending," she whispered against my lips. "It can't be." She dressed in the pale pre-dawn light, each piece of clothing she put on feeling like a wall being rebuilt between us. I watched her, wrapped in the Afghan, memorizing the way she moved, the quiet efficiency of her actions. At the door she turned. She didn't say she'd call or text or write. She simply looked at me, her gaze holding a universe of unspoken promises and unasked questions. "This story isn't finished," she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. And then she was gone. The lock clicked into place, the sound echoing in the silent house. I sat there on the rug, in the room that smelled of us, of sandalwood and sex and a profound, life-altering intimacy. The warmth of her body was already fading from the sheets of the Afghan. The suspense of her departure was a new, aching void. Tokyo. 3 months. Felt like a lifetime. But her final words hung in the air, a tantalizing thread of hope, a promise of a third unforeseen act waiting in the wings. The story wasn't finished, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would wait for it to continue.